Welcome to Lesson 1, the infinitive. The infinitive is the default position of any verb in both the English and Spanish language. In English, we think of the infinitive as two verbs. When I say two verbs, what I mean is verbs with the word to placed in front of them, such as to jump, to walk, to dive, etc. Most of us do not ever remember hearing about infinitives in a grammar lesson when we were children. However, as teenagers or adults attempting to learn a second language, understanding what the infinitive is and how it works is indispensable. Imagine if you wanted to say, I want to learn Spanish, but you don't understand what the to was for or why the verb was formed that way, so instead you said, I want learn Spanish, or I want learn Spanish. If you spoke that way, people would most likely recommend that you learn English first. So, we see that the infinitive is important and is the logical starting place when learning Spanish verbs. What we express as to eat in English is expressed in Spanish as comer. In Spanish, there is no special word such as to placed in front of a verb to indicate that it is an infinitive. Rather, the indication is made through the spelling of the verb. This is true for every Spanish verb tense. The spelling of Spanish verbs changes nearly each time you change tense of subject, much more than in English. Every Spanish infinitive can be placed into three categories. 1. Verbs that end in AR. 2. Verbs that end in ER. And 3. Verbs that end in IR. What this means is that the spelling of a verb in its infinitive form has an AR, ER, or IR ending. The type of ending that a Spanish verb has can say a lot about the verb. This is because how we write the verb when it is in other tenses will be different depending on which of the three categories the verb is from. Remember how I said that the infinitive is the default position of a Spanish verb? Well, you can think of the infinitive as the base from which all other verb spellings or forms will flow from. If you have an AR ending verb, for instance, then all spellings of the verb in all other tenses will usually be typical of AR verbs. Verb structure in Spanish is, for the most part, uniform and logical. If you learn about the three different verb groups and how they work, you will be able to understand the system which Spanish verbs use. Conjugation is an important word. When I say conjugation, I refer to the way that a verb's spelling and meaning change when a verb changes tense or pronoun. When I say pronoun, I refer to a subject to which the verb must correspond, such as I, you, he, she, we, it, and they. When I say tense, I am referring to the time or meaning of the verb, such as present, past, or future. Just as in English, every single Spanish verb must correspond to a pronoun and tense if it is going to make any sense in the context of a sentence. The infinitive is the only form of the Spanish verb which does not correspond to a tense or to a pronoun. It simply refers to an idea, to think, as in the act of thinking, regardless of time or subject. This is what makes the infinitive special, and so it is extremely important as the first step towards learning Spanish verbs. There are three uses of the infinitive that you will use at least 80% of the time when communicating in Spanish. Firstly, as I already explained, the infinitive can be used to refer to the idea of doing something, the act of doing something such as to eat or comer in Spanish. Secondly, the infinitive is often used by placing it behind an already conjugated verb. For example, I want to eat, yo quiero comer, or they have to have by the by students for students product. Ellos tienen que tener los productos de by students for students. The third and most unusual use of the Spanish infinitive for native English speakers is when it is used in the place of a present progressive in English. What do I mean by this? Well, the present progressive is what we will be learning about in the next lecture, but for now, think of it as the verbs you know in English with ing endings, such as eating, speaking, and living. In Spanish, the present progressive is not used as much as it is in English. Often, the infinitive is used in place of the present progressive. For example, I hate studying can refer to what you are doing right now in this very moment, or what you are doing in general. In Spanish, however, studying would not be the correct way to say this. Yo oído estudiando is wrong. We should instead be using the infinitive, yo oído estudiar. Rather than saying, I hate studying, it would be more appropriate to use the infinitive and say, I hate to study. It is important not to overuse the present progressive and to remember what the infinitive is and when to use it. This completes Lesson 1, the infinitive.